Hey, Psych people, we're getting towards the end of this fascinating experiment that was or is the COVID-19 online schooling. Hopefully you've handled it okay. I've been through a number of different stages. Just at first, I think there was a sort of a mania associated with the unknown. So we were kind of like, oh, wow, we got some days off of school and we'll probably be back in like 2 or 3 weeks once this cools down. And then after that, you kind of get to the realization that, wait a minute, I don't think we're going back to school. This might be a lot worse than we thought it was. And then you get to the point where you're like worried about everybody around you and this, that, and the other thing. And then you kind of break through and you realize that, hey, this is a part of existence. Trial and tribulation is a part of existence. And you take a look at yourself and you realize that your hair is longer and you want to get back to normalcy. There's no fear. There's just, hey, look, man, let's confront this head on. That's kind of what I went through. Kubler-Ross, which you've learned about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in theology, most likely, where she has the stages of death. It's kind of grim. I kind of went through those stages when I was 30 because they thought I had lung cancer. And I had a bunch of tumors in my lungs, and I had the the whole meeting with the oncologist. And the oncologist, it's one day you're in a bike race and you start to spit up blood, and you're like, what the heck? What is that? What is that? That's I don't know. I'm making reference to the funniest YouTube thing I think I've ever seen. But getting back to that, like you're 1 minute, you're racing your bike and you all of a sudden cough up and you're like, ugh. And there's this like blood coming up and you go to the emergency room and, you're like, oh, it can't be anything serious. I'm 29 years old, I'm sure it's just something like a bad nosebleed. And then all of a sudden the doctors come in and they're like, we got to run a bunch more tests and a bunch more and a bunch more. And before you know it, you're sitting in an oncologist's office and they're like giving you brochures on, you can, in a best case scenario, drugs have gotten us to where we can get you 5 more years. And you're like, what? Wait, what? What is going on here? How do we get here? And you keep waiting. You're in denial. That's a big part of Kubler-Ross. And then you, according to Kubler-Ross, you fight that. And you are like, no, it's not possible, this, that, and the other thing. And then you go through the why me and this, that, and the other thing. And I didn't really go through the why me too much. I think at that I was sort of like, whatever. Not saying it was that easy to get to the acceptance point. That was certainly not the case. But you do eventually get to that point where you're like, whatever's meant to happen is going to happen. What are you going to do? Don't mean to leave you hanging on that story. It worked out. They they just couldn't figure out why I had a bunch of tumors in my lungs, and finally they after about they wouldn't give me chemo, because they were like, if it's not cancer, the chemo, if it's an infection, it would kill them. So they just kind of were like, let's watch. And finally they were just like, they found some crazy drug and they gave it to me, and I started coughing out all kinds of crap. And then so they went in and they grabbed one of them, and it turned out it was like a tropical mold that I had inhaled on like a surf trip when I was a kid. And it had, my body's immune system had kind of gotten so crazy that it had started attacking this thing and presented as like, cancer. So, it was interesting because that process took about a year. So you had to go through those I was kind of forced to go through those Kubler-Ross stages, which I will talk about a little in maybe the next segment. I don't even know why I got started on that. Why did I get started on that? Well, who knows? Look, I think our brains are a little fried at this point. Anyway, I don't know why I got started on it, but I did. So anyway, let's get to PTSD and depression. So we left off kind of with depression and some of the things, anxiety and depression, which go hand in hand. We have a guy by the name of Martin Seligman who came up with a theory about our depression, which was he believed that we kind of developed this learned helplessness due to an absence of control. And he said that one of the important things is when you're raising a child is that you instill in your child a sense of control and a sense of you can, if you fail, that's fine. You will succeed if you take a different approach, so it's always really important to, when you are raising kids, to not let them feel that sense of failure. Well, they have to experience failure, but you don't want them to feel like there's an external locus of control that is, well, actually, that's not necessarily true. Just let me point those terms out. There's an internal locus of control, Locus, not locust like the bug, locus. So there's an internal locus of control and there's an external locus of control. An internal locus of control is where you feel like you control your results. So let's take a test. You have a test and you fail the test. Someone with an internal locus of control says, I could have prepared more for that test. I did not do everything I needed to do to prepare for that test. That's an internal locus of control. An external locus of control is somebody who believes that it was an unfair test, the teacher sucks, and I would have gotten a 100 on that test had the teacher not sucked. Okay? I'm not saying you're right or you're wrong. I'm just saying you believe that it was an external factor on that test. Somebody else believes it's an internal factor. Well, both of these can be dangerous. Not dangerous. Well, I mean dangerous, whatever. Terminology is terminology. If you believe that you control your outcomes, that's usually a good thing. It empowers in a lot of ways. But it can be a bad thing, according to Seligman, because you can develop a sense that you really aren't capable of success, right? And then if you have which is dangerous. I mean, if you have this internal locus of control guiding your everyday activities, you can develop this sort of defeatist attitude with enough failure. Same can occur with an external locus of control. If you don't feel like you have any control, you can become incredibly depressed. So if you don't feel like you have control, you can become depressed. And if you feel like you do have control, but you are just failing, depression can kick in. So, one of the things that Seligman tries to teach us is how to overcome this idea of learned helplessness, which is to, approach things from the perspective of, I may or may not succeed here, but that's not relevant to who I am as a person. Okay? Success and failure are a part of existence. This is tantamount to saying that you are. What do I want to say here? I want to apply like what I'm trying to tell you is that both success and failure are important, and how you approach success and failure is important. Success comes often after failure, and sometimes failure becomes something that you encounter quite frequently. If we take a look at athletics, one of the things I always tell any kid I'm working with, I say you got to go backwards before you go forward. And sometimes you got to go backwards 3 or 4 steps before you can make a breakthrough. Because breakthroughs are hard. And going backwards really isn't that hard. When you start to do something or redesign your swing in baseball, or learn learn new fingering style on guitar, you're going to encounter failure, but you have to see the future potential of success. Okay? And this is key to a healthy mind, okay? And avoiding the cycle of depression. Depression sets in when you don't see the potential for success, according to Seligman. So you get to the point where you just don't see any potential for successfully getting to where you want to be. This is one of the things with children when parents put kids into athletics, but the kid has absolutely zero athletic ability. Now, some kids can do that, no problem. Some kids can jump into a sport and be a member of the team and just be like, I know I'm not good, I don't care, I'm having fun out here with my buddies. That's fine. But if you put your kid in a situation where they are going to be encountering failure over and over, and you're saying, well, I want my son to learn how to deal with failure, that's fine. But failure without the prospect of success, which I have seen in some kids, like this kid shouldn't be playing here. When you work with very little kids, you're like, okay, we got to find him something that he can have the prospective success in. Because I don't want to see your child constantly fail while other kids are, succeeding. That's not healthy. That, is, you could develop a learned helplessness. And if the kid develops that learned helplessness, he'll carry that into things that he or she may have been, possibly been good at. And so you got to be really careful with that. Let me talk a bit about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is another area where I left off. With PTSD, individuals, we associate PTSD with trauma. Combat is obviously a big part of the whole trauma thing, okay? So you go off to war and you are constantly experiencing the prospect of your own demise, and you don't know where the enemy is, or you have to do these patrols in a Humvee. We have individuals with extreme PTSD who their job in the Middle East was they were in a Humvee and they would do very basic rounds in the Humvee, but these IED, these explosive devices, were an ever-present reality. And we have individuals that never once encountered fire or an IED, an explosive device, have remarkably high levels of post-traumatic stress disorder, because every time they got in that Humvee, there was the potential of them running over an IED and blowing the Humvee up. And it doesn't have to happen. That's a very important part of PTSD. You don't have to see active combat for the psychological impact of PTSD to occur. That's not necessary. What we are starting to see is individuals that have severe PTSD have very sensitive limbic systems. Now, the limbic system is the area in this sort of the temporal center of the brain that surrounds the thalamus. The thalamus is your emotion and motivation and long-term memory. So these individuals that come back, some individuals have a more sensitive limbic system, which for some reason holds on to that fear, right, and perpetuates it on a daily basis. And it gets really bad in the evening when they go to sleep, because the unconscious mind is constantly reliving those scenarios of extreme anxiety. When you're in a Humvee driving around the desert, and I haven't been in one driving around the desert, with IEDs being a reality, every day you are looking forward, not forward in a positive way, looking towards the prospect of being blown up. That's going to take a toll. And to cope with that, you're going to have to repress a lot of your reality. Now, PTSD can occur with sexual assault, violent childhood where you were, domestic violence is, anything where you on a daily basis are exposed to a very harsh, anxiety-laden experience can result in PTSD. How do we treat PTSD? Well, you have to be able to talk to someone about the experience. Our Veterans Association is making remarkable inroads into better care for our veterans. And most of what our veterans are asking for is better psychological care. Help us through this process of reacclimation. So that's one way. Obviously, serotonin reuptake inhibitors can help because they can take the anxiety out of the picture. There are drugs to help PTSD survivors sleep, not Ambien. These are trazodone, I think it is the drug that they use. Trazodone, I'm sorry, is a really good one. It has, really good one, has had pretty good results. And then you read an article about psilocybin and the drug component of the mushroom, which has shown remarkable potentiality for PTSD survivors, because it's able to kind of redirect neural pathways away from where they have gotten kind of locked into this anxiety mode, and they can kind of reset the brain out of that anxiety mode. So that's, PTSD is a tricky one. We are working on it, and depression and PTSD are really, these are two really important areas of research, because, one of the other things Seligman had said about depression is, he's like, well, in the West, where we have more depression, we are much more of an individualism-based society. And so we are not as comfortable sharing and letting others help us with our issues. And we're making tremendous progress with that. I hope that progress continues. But anyway, let me talk about a few others. Oh man, we're at 21 minutes. We have a couple other types of disorders that come up. We have somatoform disorders. You've heard the term psychosomatic. Okay? Psychosomatic means essentially that we really don't have a physical cause for why you get incredibly tense and pass out every time your husband or wife is about to get home. Okay, husband's about to get home, you start to have migraine headaches. Well, there's no physical cause. You don't have an imbalance in chemicals. You don't have a tumor. This is essentially what a somatoform disorder is. It's the mind creating a real, not fake, a real physical ailment. This is one of the stigmas with somatoform disorders, like, hypochondriasis is a somatoform disorder, hypochondriac. For years, it's been like the mentality had been, just get over it. Well, that's not easy. Someone who when they have this remarkable anxiety that results in maybe a panic attack, maybe the person full on develops skin rash. That's a common one. That is a real ailment. Now, it's not caused by a virus. It's not caused by a bacteria. We don't have a medicine we can give you to get over the ailment. Well, I take that back. I mean, there are medications to help you with the anxiety element of a somatoform disorder. But it must be treated as a mental issue, an abnormal psychology issue that is affecting your physical state. Look, get nervous for a minute and you'll feel your stomach go into fight or flight, which means you're, something like irritable bowel syndrome, which it sounds funny, the individual's intestines and digestive system are getting to the point where in some cases they can start to you can have bleeding from irritable bowel syndrome, and that is that's typically an anxiety-based issue that is affecting your physical body. It's not a virus, it's not a bacterium. It can be. Bacterium and viruses can cause irritable bowel, but the anxiety is typically at play, and it's your body's cortisol levels. Remember, we talked about all of these different effects of anxiety. That is because the cortisol, sort of everything shuts down that isn't necessary. So your digestive system kind of shuts down in a fight or flight situation. So these are real things. Hypochondriasis, if you go to WebMD, and don't do this because go to WebMD, and if you were to type in something like, lump, lump in the forearm. I'm looking at my forearm. You go in there. Okay, now a lump in the forearm is most likely a sebaceous gland, that's a hair, that has formed a cyst. I'm diagnosing a non-existent thing here. There's probably a tiny cyst in there that's causing, an immune response, or it is an immune response. I'm sorry. If you go on WebMD or the internet, by the time you're done, 3 hours later, you've got terminal brain cancer. That might be a slight exaggeration, but internet is not the place to diagnose. The doctor's office is the place to diagnose. So that's where hypochondriasis comes in. You start to constantly self-diagnose, and the next thing you know, you think you're going to catch X, Y, Z. You start to read about this stuff, and you think you're going to get it. That's why I want you to stay the hell away from the news during this COVID stuff. Okay? I'm not, COVID is dangerous. This is real. But, we're talking about, how do I say this? I don't want to demean the medical professionals who are trying to make us understand how dangerous this is. It is remarkably dangerous, but there's no purpose in getting all wound up about this. You're probably not going to have, you're probably not going to die from COVID. But if you start to get in a cycle, that's what happens. You get in a cycle of anxiety, and that is a very dangerous cycle because that cycle of anxiety brings about depression. And then you start to, then there's a loss of sleep, and sleep is very important to the immune system. So are you getting all of this? I don't even, look, kids, it's getting towards the end of the year, and some of these dog walk lectures I'm giving you are becoming rambling. I'm sorry. I can only apologize. It's my brain is getting fried between, can we talk here, between my child's mathematics and the lack of seeing you kids in a classroom and the lack of feedback from you kids. My brain, it's just, I'm reading too much, existentialism and stuff like that. And, it's just, I wish we could just get together. You're kind of my therapy every day. Anyway, there's your somatoform disorders. We don't see a physical cause for what the resulting, we really, there's no physical cause for the physical ailment. It's an emotional cause. Dissociative disorders. Dissociative disorders are, they're interesting in that the mind completely dissociates from conscious awareness. We have a really interesting case, a guy who had been in the Gulf War. He suffered from PTSD. He was, I think it was at 9/11, when 9/11 happened. He just lost his sense of who he was. Had no idea who he was. I think he was a broker on Wall Street or something. But he was found in a homeless shelter in California. like 2 years later, I'm sorry, I'm going off memory on this particular story, but the gist of it is this is called dissociative fugue, where you honestly, we think it may just be a means by which the conscious mind becomes so overwhelmed that there's a break and the individual dissociates from his consciousness and kind of just pushes it over here and has a new consciousness, that is, like a child's, constantly learning new information. It does happen. Dissociative fugue happens. The other type of dissociative disorder is dissociative identity disorder. And, the famous movie, there are couple famous stories. There's the Three Faces of Eve documentary, and then there's the movie Sybil. We love this one for like serial killer movies. I think there was an M. Night Shyamalan dissociative disorder movie. We had this almost never existed until the public started to get aware of it. And now all of a sudden we got a bunch of dissociative disorder people. This is not schizophrenia. I'll talk about schizophrenia in the next lecture. This is not schizophrenia. This is where you develop multiple personalities. So look, if this is real, there's the possibility that the multiple personalities are dissociative in that you're traumatized, you push that consciousness aside, and new consciousness takes, and it's a consciousness that can handle situations, takes the place. Maybe a bully, you develop the consciousness of a bully, or the consciousness of a small child, like a regressive consciousness. Look, that's possible, but for the most part, I think it's widely held within the psychology field that multiple personality disorder, if it exists, is so incredibly rare as a legitimate abnormal, part of abnormal psychology, that you don't really, in the psychology field, we don't spend a whole lot of time on this. Anyway, I'm at like 33 minutes. I've been rambling, possibly incoherently. For that, I apologize. I assure you I'm sober. I'm doing this in the morning, but girls, we're gonna get together on Friday for a sort of an end of the year chat. Just talk about anything. So if you didn't get the team invite, let me know, and we'll get you in on that. I've gotten my computer fixed, so Teams works. Anyway, God bless you. Thank you for your patience, and enjoy this video while you're out walking the pooch. Bye.